This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Chapter 16. We slept most all day and started out at night, a little ways behind a monstrous long raft that was as long going by as a procession. She had 4 long sweeps at each end, so we judged she carried as many as 30 men likely. She had 5 big wigwams aboard, wide apart, and an open campfire in the middle, and a tall flagpole at either end. There was a power of style about her. It amounted to something being a raftsman on such a craft as that. We went drifting down into a big bend, and the night clouded up and got hot. The river was very wide, and was walled with solid timber on both sides. You couldn't see a break in it hardly ever, or a light. We talked about Cairo, and wondered whether we would know it when we got to it. I said likely we wouldn't, because I had heard there weren't but about a dozen houses there, and if they didn't happen to have them lit up, how was we going to know we was passing a town? Jim said if the 2 big rivers joined together there, that would show. But I said maybe we might think we was passing the foot of an island and coming into the same old river again. That disturbed Jim, and me too. So the question was, what to do? I said, paddle ashore the first time a light showed and tell them Pap was behind, coming along with a trading scow, and was a green hand at the business, and wanted to know how far it was to Cairo. Jim thought it was a good idea, so we took a smoke on it and waited. There weren't nothing to do now but to look out sharp for the town, and not pass it without seeing it. He said he'd be mighty sure to see it, because he'd be a free man the minute he seed it, but if he missed it, he'd be in a slave country again and no more show for freedom. Every little while he jumps up and says, "There she is." But it warn't. It was jack-o'-lanterns or lightning bugs, so he sat down again and went to watching same as before. Jim said it made him all over trembly and feverish to be so close to freedom. Well, I can tell you it made me all over trembly and feverish too, to hear him, because I begun to get through my head that he was most free, and who was to blame for it? Why, me. I couldn't get that out of my conscience, no how nor no way. It got to troubling me so I couldn't rest. I couldn't stay still in one place. It hadn't ever come home to me before what this thing was that I was doing. But now it did, and it stayed with me, and scorched me more and more. I tried to make out to myself that I warn't to blame, because I didn't run Jim off from his rightful owner. But it warn't no use. Conscience up and says every time, "But you knowed he was running for his freedom, and you could have paddled ashore and told somebody." That was so. I couldn't get around that no way. That was where it pinched. Conscience says to me, "What had poor Miss Watson done to you that you could see her nigger go off right under your eyes and never say one single word? What did that poor old woman do to you that you could treat her so mean? Why, she tried to learn you your book, she tried to learn you your manners, and she tried to be good to you every way she knowed how. That's what she done." I got to feeling so mean and so miserable I most wished I was dead. I fidgeted up and down the raft, abusing myself to myself, and Jim was fidgeting up and down past me. We neither of us could keep still. Every time he danced around and said, "Dar's Cairo," it went through me like a shot, and I thought if it was Cairo, I reckoned I would die of miserableness. Jim talked out loud all the time while I was talking to myself. He was saying how the first thing he would do when he got to a free state, he would go to saving up money and never spend a single cent, and when he got enough he would buy his wife, which was owned on a farm close to where Miss Watson lived, and then they would both work to buy the 2 children, and if their master wouldn't sell them, they'd get an abolitionist to go and steal them. It most froze me to hear such talk. He wouldn't ever dare to talk such talk in his life before. Just see what a difference it made in him the minute he judged he was about free. It was according to the old saying, give a nigger an inch and he'll take an ell. Thinks I, this is what comes of my not thinking. Here was this nigger, which I had as good as helped to run away, coming right out flat-footed and saying he would steal his children that belonged to a man I didn't even know, a man that hadn't ever done me no harm. I was sorry to hear Jim say that. It was such a lowering of him. My conscience got to stirring me up hotter than ever, until at last I says to it, let up on me. It ain't too late yet. I'll paddle ashore at the first light and tell. I felt easy and happy and light as a feather right off. All my troubles was gone. I went to looking out sharp for a light and sort of singing to myself. By and by one showed. Jim sings out, we's safe, Huck, we's safe. Jump up and crack your heels. That's the good old Cairo at last. I just knows it. I says, I'll take the canoe and go and see, Jim. It mightn't be, you know. He jumped and got the canoe ready, and put his old coat in the bottom for me to set on, and gave me the paddle. And as I shoved off, he says, pretty soon I'll be a-shouting for joy, and I'll say, it's all on accounts of Huck. I was a free man, and I couldn't ever been free if it hadn't been for Huck. Huck done it. Jim won't ever forget you, Huck. You's the best friend Jim's ever had, and you's the only friend old Jim's got now. I was paddling off, all in a sweat to tell on him, but when he says this, it seemed to kind of take the tuck all out of me. I went along slow then, and I warn't right down certain whether I was glad I started or whether I warn't. When I was 50 yards off, Jim says, there you goes, the old true Huck, the only white gentleman that ever kept his promise to old Jim. Well, I just felt sick. But I says, I got to do it. I can't get out of it. Right then along comes a skiff with 2 men in it with guns, and they stopped and I stopped. One of them says, what's that yonder? A piece of a raft, I says. Do you belong on it? Yes, sir. Any men on it? Only one, sir. Well, there's 5 niggers run off tonight up yonder, above the head of the bend. Is your man white or black? I didn't answer up prompt. I tried to, but the words wouldn't come. I tried for a second or two to brace up and out with it, but I warn't man enough. Hadn't the spunk of a rabbit. I see I was weakening, so I just give up trying, and up and says, he's white. I reckon we'll go and see for ourselves. I wish you would, says I, because it's Pap that's there, and maybe you'd help me tow the raft ashore where the light is. He's sick, and so is Mam and Mary Ann. Oh, the devil! We're in a hurry, boy. But I suppose we've got to. Come, buckle to your paddle, and let's get along. I buckled to my paddle, and they laid to their oars. When we had made a stroke or two, I says, Pap'll be mighty much obleeged to you, I can tell you. Everybody goes away when I want them to help me tow the raft ashore, and I can't do it by myself. Well, that's infernal mean. Odd, too. Say, boy, what's the matter with your father? It's well, it ain't anything much. They stopped pulling. It warn't but a mighty little ways to the raft now. One says, Boy, that's a lie. What is the matter with your pap? Answer up square now, and it'll be the better for you. I will, sir. I will, honest, but don't leave me, please. It's gentlemen, if you only pull ahead and let me heave you the headline, you won't have to come near the raft. Please do. Set her back, John, set her back, says one. They backed water. Keep away, boy, keep to leeward. Confound it, I just expect the wind has blowed it to us. Your pap's got the smallpox, and you know it precious well. Why didn't you come out and say so? Do you want to spread it all over?" "Well," says I, a blubbering, "I've told everybody before, and they just went away and left us." "Poor devil, there's something in that. We are right down sorry for you, but well, hang it, we don't want the smallpox, you see. Looky here, I'll tell you what to do. Don't you try to land by yourself, or you'll smash everything to pieces. You float along down about 20 miles, and you'll come to a town on the left-hand bank of the river. It will be long after sunup then, and when you ask for help, you tell them your folks are all down with chills and fever. Don't be a fool again and let people guess what is the matter. Now we're trying to do you a kindness, so you just put 20 miles between us, that's a good boy. It wouldn't do any good to land yonder where the light is. It's only a wood yard. Say, I reckon your father's poor, and I'm bound to say he's in pretty hard luck. Here, I'll put a $20 gold piece on this board, and you get it when it floats by. I feel mighty mean to leave you, but my kingdom, it won't do to fool with smallpox, don't you see?" "Hold on, Parker," says the other man. "Here's a 20 to put on the board for me. Good-bye, boy. You do as Mr. Parker told you, and you'll be all right." "That's so, my boy. Good-bye. Good-bye. If you see any runaway niggers, you get help and nab them, and you can make some money by it." "Good-bye, sir," says I. "I won't let no runaway niggers get by me if I can help it." They went off, and I got aboard the raft, feeling bad and low, because I knowed very well I had done wrong, and I see it warn't no use for me to try to learn to do right. A body that don't get started right when he's little ain't got no show. When the pinch comes, there ain't nothin' to back him up and keep him to his work, and so he gets beat. Then I thought a minute, and says to myself, hold on. S'pose you'd have done right and give Jim up, would you felt better than what you do now? No, says I. I'd feel bad. I'd feel just the same way I do now. Well then, says I, what's the use you learning to do right when it's troublesome to do right and ain't no trouble to do wrong, and the wages is just the same? I was stuck. I couldn't answer that. So I reckoned I wouldn't bother no more about it, but after this always do whichever come handiest at the time. I went into the wigwam. Jim warn't there. I looked all around. He warn't anywhere. I says, Jim!
Here I is, Huck. Is they out of sight yet? Don't talk loud.
He was in the river under the stern oar with just his nose out. I told him they was out of sight, so he come aboard. He says,
I was a-listening to all the talk, and I slips into the river and was gwine to shove for shore if they come aboard. Then I was gwine to swim to the raft again when they was gone. But lawsy, how you did fool 'em, Huck. That was the smartest dodge. I tell you, child, I expected save old Jim. Old Jim ain't gonna forget you for dat, honey.
Then we talked about the money. It was a pretty good raise, $20 apiece. Jim said he could take the deck passage on a steamboat now, and the money would last us as far as we wanted to go in the Free States. He said 20 mile more warn't far for the raft to go, but he wished we was already there. Towards daybreak we tied up, and Jim was mighty particular about hiding the raft good. Then he worked all day fixing things in bundles and getting all ready to quit rafting. That night about 10 we hove in sight of the lights of a town away down in a left-hand bend. I went off in the canoe to ask about it. Pretty soon I found a man out in the river with a skiff setting a trot line. I ranged up and says, Mister, is that town Cairo? Cairo? No, you must be a blame fool. What town is it, mister? If you want to know, go and find out. If you stay here bothering around me for half a minute longer, you'll get something you won't want. I paddled to the raft. Jim was awful disappointed, but I said never mind. Cairo would be the next place, I reckoned. We passed another town before daylight, and I was going out again, but it was high ground, so I didn't go. No high ground round Cairo, Jim said. I had forgot it. We laid up for the day on a towhead tolerable close to the left-hand bank. I begun to suspicion something. So did Jim. I says, maybe we went by Cairo in the fog that night. He says,
Don't let's talk about it, Huck. Po niggers can't have no luck. I allus expected that rattlesnake skin warn't done with its work.
I wish I never seen that snake skin, Jim. I do wish I never laid eyes on it.
It ain't your fault, Huck. You didn't know. Don't you blame yourself 'bout it.
When it was daylight, here was the clear Ohio water inshore, sure enough, and outside was the old regular muddy. So it was all up with Cairo. We talked it all over. It wouldn't do to take to the shore. We couldn't take the raft up the stream, of course. There warn't no way but to wait for dark and start back in the canoe and take the chances. So we slept all day amongst the cottonwood thicket, so as to be fresh for the work. And when we went back to the raft about dark, the canoe was gone. We didn't say a word for a good while. There warn't anything to say. We both knowed well enough that it was some more work of the rattlesnake skin, so what was the use to talk about it? It would only look like we was finding fault, and that would be bound to fetch more bad luck, and keep on fetching it too, till we knowed enough to keep still. By and by we talked about what we better do, and found there wa'n't no way but just to go along down with the raft till we got a chance to buy a canoe to go back in. We weren't going to borrow it when there warn't anybody around, the way Pap would do, for that might set people after us. So we shoved out after dark on the raft. Anybody that don't believe yet that it's foolishness to handle a snakeskin, after all that snakeskin done for us, will believe it now if they read on and see what more it done for us. The place to buy canoes is off of rafts laying up at shore. But we didn't see no rafts laying up, so we went along during 3 hours and more. Well, the night got gray and ruther thick, which is the next meanest thing to fog. You can't tell the shape of the river, and you can't see no distance. It got to be very late and still, and then along comes a steamboat up the river. We lit the lantern, and judged she would see it. Upstream boats don't generally come close to us. They go out and follow the bars and hunt for easy water under the reefs. But nights like this they bull right up the channel against the whole river. We could hear her pounding along, but we didn't see her good till she was close. She aimed right for us. Often they do that and try to see how close they can come without touching. Sometimes the wheel bites off a sweep, and then the pilot sticks his head out and laughs and thinks he's mighty smart. Well, here she comes, and we said she was going to try and shave us, but she didn't seem to be shearing off a bit. She was a big one, and she was coming in a hurry, too, looking like a black cloud with rows of glowworms around it. But all of a sudden she bulged out, big and scary, with a long row of wide-open furnace doors shining like red-hot teeth, and her monstrous bows and guards hanging right above us. There was a yell at us, and a jingling of bells to stop the engines, a powwow of cussing, and whistling of steam, and as Jim went overboard on one side and I on the other, she come smashing straight through the raft. I dived, and I aimed to find the bottom, too, for a 30-foot wheel had got to go over me, and I wanted it to have plenty of room. I could always stay under water a minute. This time I reckon I stayed under a minute and a half. Then I bounced for the top in a hurry, for I was nearly busting. I popped out to my armpits and blowed the water out of my nose and puffed a bit. Of course there was a booming current, and of course that boat started her engines again 10 seconds after she stopped them, for they never cared much for raftsmen, for now she was churning along up the river, out of sight in the thick weather, though I could hear her. I sung out for Jim about a dozen times, but I didn't get any answer, so I grabbed a plank that touched me while I was treading water, and struck out for shore, shoving it ahead of me. But I made out to see that the drift of the current was towards the left-hand shore, which meant that I was in a crossing, so I changed off and went that way. It was one of these long, slanting 2-mile crossings, so I was a good long time in getting over. I made a safe landing and clumb up the bank. I couldn't see but a little ways, but I went poking along over rough ground for a quarter of a mile or more, and then I run across a big old-fashioned double log house before I noticed it. I was going to rush by and get away, but a lot of dogs jumped out and went to howling and barking at me, and I knew better than to move another peg. End of chapter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Chapter 17. In about a minute somebody spoke out of a window without putting his head out and says, "Be done, boys. Who's there?" I says, "It's me." "Who's me?" "George Jackson, sir." "What do you want?" "I don't want nothing, sir. I only want to go along by, but the dogs won't let me." "What are you prowling around here this time of night for, hey?" "I warn't prowling around, sir. I fell overboard off of the steamboat." "Oh, you did you? Strike a light there, somebody. What did you say your name was?" "George Jackson, sir. I'm only a boy." "Look here, if you're telling the truth you needn't be afraid. Nobody'll hurt you. But don't try to budge. Stand right where you are. Rouse out Bob and Tom, some of you, and fetch the guns. George Jackson, is there anybody with you?" "No, sir, nobody." I heard the people stirring around in the house now and see a light. The man sung out, "Snatch that light away, Betsy, you old fool. Ain't you got any sense? Put it on the floor behind the front door. Bob, if you and Tom are ready, take your places." "All ready." "Now, George Jackson, do you know the Shepherdsons?" "No, sir. I never heard of them." "Well, that may be so, and it mayn't. Now, all ready. Step forward, George Jackson. And mind, don't you hurry. Come mighty slow. If there's anybody with you, let him keep back. If he shows himself, he'll be shot. Come along now. Come slow. Push the door open yourself, just enough to squeeze in, do you hear?" I didn't hurry. I couldn't if I wanted to. I took one slow step at a time, and there warn't a sound, only I thought I could hear my heart. The dogs were as still as the humans, but they followed a little behind me. When I got to the 3 log doorsteps, I heard them unlocking and unbarring and unbolting. I put my hand on the door and pushed it a little more, till somebody said, "There, that's enough. Put your head in." I done it, but I judged they would take it off. The candle was on the floor, and there they all was, and looking at me, and me at them, for about a quarter of a minute. 3 big men with guns pointed at me, which made me wince, I tell you. The oldest, gray and about 60, the other 2 30 or more, all of them fine and handsome, and the sweetest old gray-haired lady, and back of her 2 young women which I couldn't see right well. The old gentleman says, "There, I reckon it's all right. Come in." As soon as I was in, the old gentleman he locked the door and barred it and bolted it, and told the young men to come in with their guns, and they all went in a big parlor that had a new rag carpet on the floor, and got together in a corner that was out of the range of the front windows. There warn't none on the side. They held the candle and took a good look at me, and all said, "Why, he ain't a Shepherdson. No, there ain't any Shepherdson about him." Then the old man said he hoped I wouldn't mind being searched for arms, because he didn't mean no harm by it. It was only to make sure. But he didn't pry into my pockets, but only felt outside with his hands and said it was all right. He told me to make myself easy and at home and tell me all about myself. But the old lady says, "Why, bless you, Saul, the poor thing's as wet as he can be, and don't you reckon it may be he's hungry?" True for you, Rachel, I forgot." So the old lady says, "Betsy," this was a nigger woman, "you fly round and get him something to eat as quick as you can, poor thing. And one of you girls go and wake up Buck and tell him, oh, here he is hisself. Buck, take this little stranger and get the wet clothes off of him and dress him up in some of yours that's dry." Buck looked about as old as me, 13 or 14 or along there, although he's a little bigger than me. He hadn't on anything but a shirt, and he was very frowsy-headed. He came in gapping and digging one fist into his eyes, and he was dragging a gun along with the other one. He says, "Ain't there no Shepherdsons around?" They said no, 'twas a false alarm. "Well," he says, "if they'd have been some, I reckon I'd have got one." They all laughed, and Bob says, "Why, Buck, they might have scalped us all. You've been so slow in coming." "Well, nobody come after me, and it ain't right I'm always kept down. I don't get no show." "Never mind, Buck, my boy," says the old man. "You'll have show enough, all in good time. Don't you fret about that. Go 'long with you now, and do as your mother told you." When we got upstairs to his room, he got me a coarse shirt and a roundabout and pants of his, and I put them on. While I was at it, he asked me what my name was, but before I could tell him, he started to tell me about a blue jay and a young rabbit he had catched on the woods day before yesterday, and he asked me where Moses was when the candle went out. I said I didn't know. I hadn't heard about it before, no way. "Well, guess," he says. "How am I going to guess," says I, "when I never heard tell of it before?" "But you can guess, can't you? It's just as easy." "Which candle?" I says. "Why, any candle," he says. "I don't know where he was," says I. "Where was he?" "Why, he was in the dark, that's where he was." "Well, if you knowed where he was, what did you ask me for?" "Why, blame it, it's a riddle, don't you see? Say, how long are you going to stay there? You got to stay always. We can just have booming times. They don't have no school now. Do you own a dog? I got a dog. He'll go in the river and bring out chips that you throw in. Do you like to comb up Sundays and all that kind of foolishness? You bet I don't, but Ma, she makes me. Confound these old britches. I reckon I'd better put 'em on, but I'd rather not. It's so warm. Are you all ready? All right. Come along, old hoss." Cold corn pone, cold corned beef, butter and buttermilk, that is what they had for me down there, and there ain't nothing better that ever I've come across yet. Buck and his ma and all of them smoked cob pipes, except the nigger woman, which was gone, and the two young women. They all smoked and talked, and I eat and talked. The young women had quilts around them and their hair down their backs. They all asked me questions, and I told them how Pap and me and all the family was living on a little farm down at the bottom of Arkansas, and my sister Mary Ann run off and got married and never was heard of no more, and Bill went to hunt them and he warn't heard of no more, and Tom and Mort died, and then there warn't nobody but just me and Pap left. He was just trimmed down to nothing on account of his troubles, so when he died I took what there was left, because the farm didn't belong to us, started up the river, deck passage, and fell overboard, and that was how I come to be here. So they said I could have a home there as long as I wanted it. Then it was most daylight, and everybody went to bed, and I went to bed with Buck, and when I waked up in the morning, drat it all, I had forgot what my name was. So I laid there about an hour trying to think, and when Buck waked up, I says, "Can you spell, Buck?" "Yes," he says. "I bet you can't spell my name," says I. "I bet you what you dare I can," says he. "All right," says I. "Go ahead." George Jackson. There now, he says. "Well," says I. "You done it, but I didn't think you could. It ain't no slouch of a name to spell, right off without studying." I set it down private because somebody might want me to spell it next, and so I wanted to be handy with it and rattle it off just like I was used to it. It was a mighty nice family, and a mighty nice house, too. I hadn't seen no house out in the country before that was so nice and had so much style. It didn't have an iron latch on the front door, nor a wooden one with a buckskin string, but a brass knob to turn, the same as houses in town. There warn't no bed in the parlor, nor a sign of a bed, but heaps of parlors in towns has beds in 'em. There was a big fireplace that was bricked on the bottom, and the bricks was kept clean and red by pouring water on them and scrubbing them with another brick. Sometimes they wash 'em over with red water paint that they call Spanish brown, same as they do in town. They had big brass dog irons that could hold up a saw log. There was a clock on the middle of the mantelpiece, with a picture of a town painted on the bottom half of the glass front, and a round place in the middle of it for the sun, and you could see the pendulum swinging behind it. It was beautiful to hear that clock tick, and sometimes when one of these peddlers had been along and scoured her up and got her in good shape, she would start in and strike 150 before she got tuckered out. They wouldn't took any money for her. Well, there was a big outlandish parrot on each side of the clock, made out of something like chalk, and painted up gaudy. By one of the parrots was a cat made of crockery, and a crockery dog by the other, and when you pressed down on them they squeaked, but didn't open their mouths nor look different nor interested. They squeaked through underneath. There was a couple of big wild turkey wing fans spread out behind these things. On the table in the middle of the room was a kind of a lovely crockery basket that had apples and oranges and peaches and grapes piled up in it, which was much redder and yellower and prettier than real ones is, but they weren't real because you could see there was pieces that got chipped off and showed the white chalk, or whatever it was, underneath. This table had a cover made out of a beautiful oilcloth, with a red and blue spread eagle painted on it, and a painted border all around. It come all the way from Philadelphia, they said. There was some books, too, piled up perfectly exact on each corner of the table. One was a big family Bible full of pictures. One was Pilgrim's Progress, about a man that left his family, it didn't say why. I read considerable in it now and then. The statements was interesting but tough. Another was Friendship's Offering, full of beautiful stuff and poetry, but I didn't read the poetry. Another was Henry Clay's Speeches, and another was Dr. Gunn's Family Medicine, which told you all about what to do if a body was sick or dead. There was a hymn book and a lot of other books, and there was nice split-bottom chairs, and perfectly sound, too, not bagged down in the middle and busted like an old basket. They had pictures hung on the walls, mainly Washingtons and Lafayettes, and battles, and Highland Marys, and one called Signing the Declaration. There was some that they called crayons, which one of the daughters which was dead made her own self when she was only 15 years old. They was different from any pictures I ever see before, blacker mostly than is common. One was a woman in a slim black dress, belted small under the armpits, with bulges like a cabbage in the middle of the sleeves, and a large black scoop shovel bonnet with a black veil, and white slim ankles crossed about with black tape, and very wee black slippers like a chisel, and she was leaning pensive on a tombstone on her right elbow under a weeping willow, and her other hand hanging down her side holding a white handkerchief and a reticule, and underneath the picture it said, "Shall I never see thee more, alas?" Another one was a young lady with her hair all combed up straight to the top of her head and knotted there in front of a comb like a chair-back, and she was crying into a handkerchief and had a dead bird laying on its back in her other hand with its heels up. And underneath the picture it said, "I shall never hear thy sweet chirrup more, alas." And there was one where a young lady was at a window looking up at the moon, and tears running down her cheeks, and she had an open letter in one hand with black sealing wax showing on one edge of it, and she was mashing a locket with a chain to it against her mouth, and underneath the picture it said, "And art thou gone? Yes, thou art gone, alas." And these was all nice pictures, I reckon, but I didn't somehow seem to take to them, because if ever I was down a little they always give me the fan-tods. Everybody was sorry she died, because she had laid out a lot more of these pictures to do, and a body could see by what she had done what they had lost. But I reckoned that with her disposition she was having a better time in the graveyard. She was at work on what they said was her greatest picture when she took sick, and every day and every night it was her prayer to be allowed to live till she got it done, but she never got the chance. It was a picture of a young woman in a long white gown, standing on the rail of a bridge all ready to jump off, with her hair all down her back, and looking up to the moon, and with the tears running down her face, and she had 2 arms folded across her breast, and 2 arms stretched out in front, and 2 more reaching up towards the moon, and the idea was to see which pair would look best, and then scratch out all the other arms. But, as I was saying, she died before she got her mind made up, and now they kept this picture over the head of the bed in her room, and every time her birthday come they hung flowers on it. Other times it was hid with a little curtain. The young woman in the picture had a kind of a nice, sweet face, but there was so many arms it made her look too spidery, seemed to me. This young girl kept a scrapbook while she was alive, and used to paste obituaries and accidents and cases of patient suffering in it out of the Presbyterian Observer, and write poetry after them out of her own head. It was very good poetry. This is what she wrote down about a boy by the name of Stephen Dowling Bots that fell down a well and was drowned. Ode to Stephen Dowling Bots, deceased. And did young Stephen sicken? And did young Stephen die? And did the sad hearts thicken? And did the mourners cry? No, such was not the face of young Stephen Dowling Bots, though sad hearts round him thickened. 'Twas not from sickness shots. No whooping cough did rack his frame, nor measles drear with spots. Not these impaired the sacred name of Stephen Dowling Bots. Despised love struck not with woe that head of curly knots, nor stomach troubles laid him low, young Stephen Dowling Bots. Oh no, then list with tearful eye, whilst I his fate do tell. His soul did from this cold world fly, by falling down a well. They got him out and emptied him. Alas, it was too late. His spirit was gone for to sport aloft in the realms of the good and great. If Emmeline Grangerford could make poetry like that before she was 14, there ain't no telling what she could have done by and by. Buck said she could rattle off poetry like nothing. She didn't ever have to stop to think. He said she would slap down a line, and if she couldn't find anything to rhyme with it, would just scratch it out and slap down another one and go ahead. She warn't particular. She could write about anything you choose to give her to write about, just so it was sadful. Every time a man died, or a woman died, or a child died, she would be on hand with her tribute before he was cold. She called them tributes. The neighbors said it was the doctor first, then Emmeline, then the undertaker. The undertaker never got in ahead of Emmeline but once, and then she hung fire on a rhyme for the dead person's name, which was Whistler. She warn't ever the same after that. She never complained, but she kind of pined away and did not live long. Poor thing, many's the time I made myself go up to the little room that used to be hers and get out her poor old scrapbook and read in it when her pictures had been aggravating me and I had soured on her a little. I liked all that family, dead ones and all, and weren't going to let anything come between us. Poor Emmeline made poetry about all the dead people when she was alive, and it didn't seem right that there warn't nobody to make some about her now she was gone. So I tried to sweat out a verse or two myself, but I couldn't seem to make it go somehow. They kept Emmeline's room trim and nice, and all the things fixed in it just the way she liked to have them when she was alive, and nobody ever slept there. The old lady took care of the room herself, though there was plenty of niggers, and she sewed there a good deal and read her Bible there mostly. Well, as I was going to say about the parlor, there was beautiful curtains on the windows, white, with pictures painted on them of castles with vines all down the walls, and cattle coming down to drink. There was a little old piano, too, that had tin pans in it, I reckon, and nothing was ever so lovely as to hear the young ladies sing "The Last Link is Broken," and play "The Battle of Prague" on it. The walls of all the rooms was plastered, and most had carpets on the floors, and the whole house was whitewashed on the outside. It was a double house, and the big open place betwixt them was roofed and floored, and sometimes the table was set there in the middle of the day, and it was a cool, comfortable place. Nothing couldn't be better, and warn't the cooking good, and just bushels of it, too. End of chapter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Chapter 18. Colonel Grangerford was a gentleman, you see. He was a gentleman all over, and so was his family. He was well born, as the saying is, and that's worth as much in a man as it is in a horse, so the widow Douglas said, and nobody ever denied that she was of the first aristocracy in our town. And Pap, he always said it too, though he warn't no more quality than a mud-cat himself. Colonel Grangerford was very tall and very slim, and had a darkish, paly complexion, not a sign of red in it anywheres. He was clean-shaved every morning all over his thin face, and he had the thinnest kind of lips, and the thinnest kind of nostrils, and a high nose, and heavy eyebrows, and the blackest kind of eyes, sunk so deep back that they seemed like they was looking out of caverns at you, as you may say. His forehead was high, and his hair was black and straight and hung to his shoulders. His hands was long and thin, and every day of his life he put on a clean shirt and a full suit from head to foot, made out of linen so white it hurt your eyes to look at it. And on Sundays he wore a blue tailcoat with brass buttons on it. He carried a mahogany cane with a silver head to it. There warn't no frivolousness about him, not a bit, and he warn't ever loud. He was as kind as he could be. You could feel that, you know, and so you had confidence. Sometimes he smiled, and it was good to see. But when he straightened himself up like a liberty pole, and the lightning begun to flicker out from under his eyebrows, you wanted to climb a tree first and find out what the matter was afterwards. He didn't ever have to tell anybody to mind their manners. Everybody was always good-mannered where he was. Everybody loved to have him around, too. He was sunshine most always. I mean, he made it seem like good weather. When he turned into a cloud bank, it was awful dark for half a minute, and that was enough. There wouldn't nothing go wrong again for a week. When him and the old lady came down in the morning, all the family got up out of their chairs and gave them good day, and didn't sit down again till they had sat down. When Tom and Bob went to the sideboard where the decanter was, and mixed a glass of bitters and handed it to him, and he held it in his hand and waited till Tom's and Bob's was mixed, and then they bowed and said, "Our duty to you, sir and madam," and they bowed the least bit in the world and said thank you, and so they drank, all three, and Bob and Tom poured a spoonful of water on the sugar and the mite of whiskey or apple brandy in the bottom of their tumblers, and give it to me and Buck, and we drank to the old people too. Bob was the oldest and Tom next. Tall, beautiful men with very broad shoulders and brown faces, and long black hair and black eyes. They dressed in white linen from head to foot, like the old gentleman, and wore broad Panama hats. Then there was Miss Charlotte. She was 25, and tall and proud and grand, but as good as she could be when she weren't stirred up. But when she was, she had a look that would make you wilt in your tracks, like her father. She was beautiful. So was her sister, Miss Sophia, but it was a different kind. She was gentle and sweet like a dove, and she was only 20. Each person had their own nigger to wait on them, Buck too. My nigger had a monstrous easy time, because I warn't used to having anybody do anything for me, but Buck's was on the jump most of the time. This was all there was of the family now, but there used to be more. 3 sons, they got killed, and Emmeline that died. The old gentleman owned a lot of farms and over 100 niggers. Sometimes a stack of people would come there, horseback, from 10 or 15 mile around, and stay 5 or 6 days, and have such junketings round about and on the river, and dances and picnics in the woods daytimes, and balls at the house nights. These people was mostly kinfolks of the family. The men brought their guns with them. It was a handsome lot of quality, I tell you. There was another clan of aristocracy around there, 5 or 6 families, mostly of the name of Shepherdson. They was as high-toned and well-born and rich and grand as the tribe of Grangerfords. The Shepherdsons and Grangerfords used the same steamboat landing, which was about 2 mile above our house. So sometimes when I went up there with a lot of our folks, I used to see a lot of the Shepherdsons there on their fine horses. One day Buck and me was away out in the woods hunting, and heard a horse coming. We was crossing the road. Buck says, "Quick, jump for the woods." We done it, and then peeped down the woods through the leaves. Pretty soon a splendid young man come galloping down the road, setting his horse easy and looking like a soldier. He had his gun across his pommel. I had seen him before. It was young Harney Shepherdson. I heard Buck's gun go off at my ear, and Harney's hat tumbled off from his head. He grabbed his gun and rode straight to the place where we was hid. But we didn't wait. We started through the woods on a run. The woods weren't thick, so I looked over my shoulder to dodge the bullet, and twice I seen Harney cover Buck with his gun. And then he rode away the way he come. To get his hat, I reckon, but I couldn't see. We never stopped running till we got home. The old gentleman's eyes blazed a minute. 'Twas pleasure mainly, I judged. Then his face sorta smoothed down, and he says, kind of gentle, "I don't like that shooting from behind a bush. Why didn't you step into the road, my boy?" "The Shepherdsons don't, father. They always take advantage." Miss Charlotte, she held her head up like a queen while Buck was telling his tale, and her nostrils spread and her eyes snapped. The 2 young men looked dark, but never said nothing. Miss Sophia, she turned pale, but the color come back when she found the man warn't hurt. Soon as I could get Buck down by the corn cribs under the trees by ourselves, I says, "Did you want to kill him, Buck?" "Well, I bet I did." "What did he do to you?" "Him? He never done nothin' to me." "Well, then, what did you want to kill him for?" "Why, nothin', only it's on account of the feud." "What's a feud?" "Why, where was you raised? Don't you know what a feud is?" "Never heard of it before. Tell me about it." "Well," says Buck, "a feud is this way. A man has a quarrel with another man and kills him. Then that other man's brother kills him. Then the other brothers on both sides go for one another. Then the cousins chip in, and by everybody's killed off, and there ain't no more feud. But it's kind of slow and takes a long time." "Has this one been going on long, Buck?" "Well, I should reckon. It started 30 year ago, or somewheres along there. There was trouble 'bout something, and then a lawsuit to settle it, and the suit went agin one of the men, and so he up and shot the man that won the suit, which he would naturally do, of course. Anybody would. What was the trouble about, Buck? Land? I reckon maybe. I don't know. Well, who done the shooting? Was it a Grangerford or a Shepherdson? Laws, how do I know? It was so long ago. Don't anybody know? Oh, yes, Pa knows, I reckon, and some of the other old people, but they don't know now what the row was about in the first place. Has there been many killed, Buck? Yes, right smart chance of funerals, but they don't always kill. Paul's got a few buckshot in him, but he don't mind it 'cause he don't weigh much. Anyway, Bob's been carved up some with a bowie, and Tom's been hurt once or twice. Has anybody been killed this year, Buck? Yes, we got one, and they got one. 'Bout 3 months ago, my cousin Bud, 14-year-old, was riding through the woods on the other side of the river, and didn't have no weapon with him, which was blame foolishness, and in a lonesome place he hears a horse a-comin' behind him, and sees old Baldy Shepherdson a-linkin' after him with his gun in his hand and his white hair a-flyin' in the wind. And 'stead of jumpin' off and taking to the brush, Bud 'lowed he could outrun him. So they had it, nip and tug, for 5 mile or more, the old man a-gainin' all the time. So at last Bud seen it warn't any use, so he stopped and faced around so as to have the bullet holes in front, you know, and the old man he rode up and shot him down. But he didn't get much chance to enjoy his luck, for inside of a week our folks laid him out. I reckon that old man was a coward, Buck. I reckon he warn't a coward, not by blame sight. There ain't a coward amongst them Shepherdsons, not a one. And there ain't no cowards amongst the Grangerfords either. Why, that old man kep up his end in a fight one day for half an hour against 3 Grangerfords, and come out winner. They was all a horseback. He lit off of his horse and got behind a little wood pile, and kept his horse before him to stop the bullets. But the Grangerfords stayed on their horses, and capered around the old man, and peppered away at him, and he peppered away at them. Him and his horse both went home pretty leaky and crippled, but the Grangerfords had to be fetched home, and one of 'em was dead, and another died the next day. No, sir. If a body's out hunting for cowards, he don't want to fool away any time amongst them Shepherdsons, because they don't breed any of that kind. Next Sunday we all went to church, about 3 mile, everybody a horseback. The men took their guns along, so did Buck, and kept them between their knees or stood them handy against the wall. The Shepherdsons done the same. It was pretty ornery preaching, all about brotherly love and such like tiresomeness, but everybody said it was a good sermon, and they all talked it over going home, and had such a powerful lot to say about faith and good works and free grace and pre-foreordestination, and I don't know what all, that it did seem to me to be one of the roughest Sundays I had run across yet. About an hour after dinner everybody was dozing around, some in their chairs and some in their rooms, and it got to be pretty dull. Buck and a dog was stretched out on the grass in the sun, sound asleep. I went up to our room and judged I would take a nap myself. I found that sweet Miss Sophia standing in her door, which was next to ours, and she took me in her room and shut the door very soft, and asked me if I liked her, and I said I did. She asked me if I would do something for her and not tell anybody, and I said I would. Then she said she'd forgot her Testament and left it in the seat at church between 2 other books, and would I slip out quiet and go there and fetch it to her and not say nothing to nobody. I said I would. So I slid out and slipped off up the road, and there warn't anybody at the church, except maybe a hog or 2, for there warn't any lock on the door, and hogs likes a punchin' floor in summertime because it's cool. If you notice, most folks don't go to church only when they've got to, but a hog is different. Says I to myself, something's up. It ain't natural for a girl to be in such a sweat about a Testament. So I give it a shake, and out drops a little piece of paper with 2:30 wrote on it with a pencil. I ransacked it, but I couldn't find anything else. I couldn't make anything out of that, so I put the paper in the book again, and when I got home and upstairs there was Miss Sophia in her door waiting for me. She pulled me in and shut the door. Then she looked in the Testament till she found the paper, and as soon as she read it she looked glad. And before a body could think, she grabbed me and give me a squeeze, and said I was the best boy in the world, and not to tell anybody. She was mighty red in the face for a minute, and her eyes lighted up, and it made her powerful pretty. I was a good deal astonished, but when I got my breath, I asked her what the paper was about, and she asked me if I'd read it. I said no, and she asked me if I could read writing, and I told her no, only coarse hand. And then she said the paper warn't anything but a bookmark to keep her place, and I might go and play now. I went off down the river, studying over this thing. Pretty soon I noticed that my nigger was following along behind. When we was out of sight of the house, he looked back and around a second, and then comes a-running and says, "Mars George, if you come down into the swamp, I'll show you a whole stack of water moccasins." Thinks I, that's mighty curious. He said that yesterday. He ought to know a body don't love water moccasins enough to go around hunting for them. What is he up to anyway? So I says, "All right, trot ahead." I followed a half a mile. Then he struck out over the swamp and waded ankle deep as much as another half mile. We come to a little flat piece of land which was dry and very thick with trees and bushes and vines, and he says, "You shove right in there just a few steps, Mars George. That's where they is. I'd seen 'em before. I don't care to see 'em no more." Then he slopped right along and went away, and pretty soon the trees hid him. I poked into the place a ways and come to a little open patch as big as a bedroom, all hung around with vines, and found a man laying there asleep, and by jings, it was my old Jim. I waked him up, and I reckoned it was going to be a grand surprise to him to see me again, but it warn't. He nearly cried, he was so glad, but he warn't surprised. Said he swum along behind me that night and heard me yell every time, but dasn't answer because he didn't want nobody to pick him up and take him into slavery again. Says he, "I got hurt a little and couldn't swim fast, so I was a considerable ways behind you towards the last. When you landed, I reckoned I could catch up with you on the land, without having to shout at you, but when I see that house, I begin to go slow. I was off too fur to hear what they say to you. I was afraid of the dogs, but when it was all quiet again, I knowed you was in the house, so I struck out for the woods to wait for day. Early in the morning, some of the niggers come along, gwine to the fields, and they took me and showed me this place, where the dogs can't track me on accounts of the water, and they brings me truck to eat every night, and tells me how you's getting along." "Why didn't you tell my Jack to fetch me here sooner, Jim?"
"Well, 'twarn't no use to disturb you, Huck, till we could do something. But we's all right now. I've been a-buyin' pots and pans and vittles, as I got a chancet, and a-patchin' up the raft nights when—"
"What raft, Jim?"
"Our old raft."
"You mean to say our old raft warn't smashed all to flinders?"
"No, she warn't. She was tore up a good deal. One end of her was, but there warn't no great harm done, only our traps was most all lost. If we hadn't dived so deep and swum so fur under water, and the night hadn't been so dark, and we weren't so skeered, and been such punkin heads, as the sayin' is, we'd a seed the raft. But it's just as well we didn't, 'cause now she's all fixed up again most as good as new, and we's got a new lot of stuff in the place of what is lost."
"Why, how did you get hold of the raft again, Jim? Did you catch her?"
"How I gwine to catch her and I out in the woods? No, Some er de niggers found her ketched on a snag along here in de bend, and dey hid her in a crick 'mongst de willers, and dey was so much jawin' about which of 'em she belonged to de mos' dat I come to hear about it pooty soon, and I ups and settles de trouble by tellin' um she don't belong to none of 'em but to you and me, and I ast 'em if dey gwine to grab a young white gentleman's property and get a hidin' for it. Den I gin 'em 10 cents apiece, and dey is mighty well satisfied, and wish some mo' rafts 'ud come along and make 'em rich agin. Dey's mighty good to me, dese niggers is, and whatever I wants 'em to do for me I don't have to ask 'em twice, honey. Dat Jack's a good nigger and pooty smart."
"Yes, he is. He ain't ever told me you was here. Told me to come, and he'd show me a lot of water moccasins. If anything happens he ain't mixed up in it. He can say he never seen us together, and it'll be the truth." I don't want to talk much about the next day. I reckon I'll cut it pretty short. I waked up about dawn and was going to turn over and go to sleep again when I noticed how still it was. Didn't seem to be anybody stirring. That warn't usual. Next, I noticed that Buck was up and gone. Well, I gets up a-wonderin' and goes downstairs. Nobody around. Everything is still as a mouse. Just the same outside. Thinks I, what does it mean? Down by the woodpile I comes across my Jack and says, "What's it all about?" Says he, "Don't you know Mars George?" "No," says I don't." "Well, den, Miss Sophia's run off. 'Deed she has. She run off in de night sometime, nobody don't know jest when. Run off to git married to dat young Harney Shepherdson, you know. Leastwise, so dey spec. De fambly found it out about half an hour ago, maybe a little more, and I tell you dey warn't no time's loss. Such another hurryin' up guns and hosses you never see. De wimmen folks is gone for to stir up de relations, and old Marse Saul and de boys tuck de guns and rode up de river road for to try and ketch dat young man and kill him 'fo' he can git across de river with Miss Sophia. I reckon dey's going to be mighty rough times." "Buck went off without waking me up." "Well, I reckon he did. Dey weren't gwine to mix you up in it. Mars Buck he loaded up his gun and 'lowed he's gwine to fetch home a Shepherdson or bust. Well, there'll be plenty of 'em dar, I reckon, and you bet you he'll fetch one if he gets a chance." I took up the river road as hard as I could get. By and by I began to hear guns a good ways off. When I come in sight of the log store on the woodpile where the steamboats lands, I worked along under the trees and brush till I got to a good place, and then I clumb up into the forks of a cottonwood that was out of reach and watched. There was a wood rank 4 foot high a little ways in front of the tree, and first I was going to hide behind that, but maybe it was luckier I didn't. There was 4 or 5 men cavorting around on their horses in the open place before the log store, cussing and yelling and trying to get at a couple of young chaps that was behind the wood rank alongside of the steamboat landing, but they couldn't come it. Every time one of them showed himself on the river side of the woodpile, he got shot at. The 2 boys was squatting back to back behind the pile so they could watch both ways. By and by the men stopped cavorting around and yelling. They started riding towards the store. Then up gets one of the boys, draws a steady bead over the wood rank, and drops one of them out of his saddle. All the men jumped off their horses and grabbed the hurt one, and started to carry him to the store. And that minute the 2 boys started on the run. They got halfway to the tree I was in before the men noticed. Then the men see them, and jumped on their horses and took out after 'em. They gained on the boys, but it didn't do no good. The boys had too good a start. They got to the woodpile that was in front of my tree and slipped in behind it, and so they had the bulge on the men again. One of the boys was Buck, and the other was a slim young chap about 19 years old. The men ripped around a while and then rode away. As soon as they was out of sight, I sung out to Buck and told him. He didn't know what to make of my voice coming out of the tree at first. He was awful surprised. He told me to watch out sharp and let him know when the men come in sight again. Said they was up to some devilment or other. Couldn't be gone long. I wished I was out of that tree, but I dasn't come down. Buck begun to cry and rip, and allowed that him and his cousin Joe, that was the other young chap, would make up for this day yet. He said his father and his 2 brothers was killed, and 2 or 3 of the enemy. Said the Shepherdsons laid for them in ambush. Buck said his father and brothers ought to have waited for their relations. The Shepherdsons was too strong for them. I asked him what was become of young Harney and Miss Sophia. He said they got across the river and was safe. I was glad of that, but the way Buck did take on, because he didn't manage to kill Harney that day he shot at him, I ain't ever heard anything like it. All of a sudden, bang, 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 goes 3 or 4 guns. The men had slipped around through the woods and come in from behind without their horses. The boys jumped for the river, both of them hurt, and as they swum down the current, the men run along the bank, shooting at them and singing out, "Kill them! Kill them!" Made me so sick I 'most fell out of the tree. I ain't a-going to tell all that happened. It would make me sick again if I was to do that. I wished I hadn't ever come ashore that night to see such things. I ain't ever going to get shut of them. Lots of times I dream about them. I stayed in the tree till it begun to get dark, afraid to come down. Sometimes I heard guns away off in the woods, and twice I seen little gangs of men gallop past the log store with guns, so I reckoned the trouble was still a-going on. I was mighty downhearted, so I made up my mind I wouldn't ever go near that house again, because I reckoned I was to blame somehow. I judged that that piece of paper meant that Miss Sophia was to meet Harney somewheres at 2:30 and run off. And I judged I ought to told her father about that paper and the curious way she acted, and then maybe he would have locked her up, and this awful mess wouldn't ever happened. When I got down out of the tree, I crept along down the river bank a piece and found the 2 bodies laying in the edge of the water, and tugged at them till I got them ashore. Then I covered up their faces and got away as quick as I could. I cried a little when I was covering up Buck's face, for he was mighty good to me. It was just dark now. I never went near the house, but struck through the woods and made for the swamp. Jim warn't on his island, so I tramped off in a hurry for the crick and crowded through the willows, red hot to jump aboard and get out of that awful country. The raft was gone. My souls, but I was scared. I couldn't get my breath for most a minute. Then I raised a yell. A voice not 25 foot from me says, "Good land, that you, honey? Don't make no noise." It was Jim's voice. Nothing ever sounded so good before. I run along the bank a piece and got aboard, and Jim he grabbed me and hugged me, he was so glad to see me. He says, "Laws bless you, child, I was right down sure you's dead again. Jack's been here. He say he reckon you's been shot, 'cause you didn't come home no more, and I's just this minute a-starting the raft down towards the mouth of the crick, so as be all ready for to shove out and leave soon as Jack comes again and tells me for certain you is dead. Lawsy, I's mighty glad to get you back again, honey." I says, "All right, that's mighty good. They won't find me, and they'll think I've been killed and floated down the river. There's something up there that'll help them think so. So don't you lose no time, Jim, but just shove off for the big water as fast as ever you can." I never felt easy till the raft was 2 miles below there and out in the middle of the Mississippi. Then we hung up our signal lantern and judged that we was free and safe once more. I hadn't had a bite to eat since yesterday, so Jim he got out some corn dodgers and buttermilk and pork and cabbage and greens. There ain't nothing in the world so good when it's cooked right. And whilst I eat my supper we talked and had a good time. I was powerful glad to get away from the feuds, and so was Jim to get away from the swamp. We said there warn't no home like a raft, after all. Other places do seem so cramped up and smothery, but a raft don't. You feel mighty free and easy and comfortable on a raft. End of chapter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Chapter 19. 2 or 3 days and nights went by. I reckon I might say they swum by. They slid along so quiet and smooth and lovely. Here's the way we put in the time. It was a monstrous big river down there, sometimes 1.5 miles wide. We run nights and laid up and hid daytimes. Soon as night was most gone, we stopped navigating and tied up, nearly always in the dead water under a towhead, and then cut young cottonwoods and willows and hid the raft with them. Then we set out the lines. Next we slid into the river and had a swim so as to freshen up and cool off. Then we sat down on the sandy bottom where the water was about knee-deep and watched the daylight come. Not a sound anywheres. Perfectly still. Just like the whole world was asleep. Only sometimes the bullfrog a-cluttering, maybe. The first thing to see, looking away over the water, was a kind of dull line. That was the woods on the other side. You couldn't make nothing else out. Then a pale place in the sky, then more paleness spreading around. Then the river softened up away off. It weren't black any more, but gray. You could see little dark spots drifting along ever so far away, trading scows and such things, and long black streaks, rafts. Sometimes you could hear a sweep squeaking, or jumbled up voices, it was so still, and sounds come so far. And by you could see a streak on the water which you know by the look of the streak that there's a snag there in the swift current which breaks on it and makes that streak look that way. And you see the mist curl up off of the water, and the east reddens up, and the river, and you make out a log cabin in the edge of the woods, away on the bank on the other side of the river, being a wood yard likely, and piled by them cheats so you can throw a dog through it anywheres. Then the nice breeze springs up and comes fanning you from over there, so cool and fresh and sweet to smell on account of the woods and the flowers. But sometimes not that way, because they've left dead fish laying around, gars and such, and they do get pretty rank. And next you got the full day, and everything smiling in the sun, and the songbirds just going it. A little smoke couldn't be noticed now, so we would take some fish off of the lines and cook up a hot breakfast. And afterwards we would watch the lonesomeness of the river, and kind of lazy along, and by lazy off to sleep. Wake up by and by, and look to see what done it, and maybe see a steamboat coughing along upstream, so far off towards the other side you couldn't tell nothing about her, only whether she was a stern wheel or a side wheel. Then for about an hour there wouldn't be nothing to hear nor nothing to see, just solid lonesomeness. Next you'd see a raft sliding by, away off yonder, and maybe a galoot on it chopping, because they're most always doing it on a raft. You'd see the axe flash and come down. You don't hear nothing. You see that axe go up again, and by the time it's above the man's head, then you hear the ka-chunk. It took all that time to come over the water. So we would put in the day, lazying around, listening to the stillness. Once there was a thick fog, and the rafts and things that went by was beating tin pans so the steamboats wouldn't run over them. A scow or a raft went by so close we could hear them talking and cussing and laughing. Heard them plain, but we couldn't see no sign of them. It made you feel crawly. It was like spirits carrying on that way in the air. Jim said he believed it was spirits, but I says, no, spirits wouldn't say, "Dern the dern fog." Soon as it was night out, we shoved. When we got her out to about the middle, we let her alone and let her float wherever the current wanted her to. Then we lit the pipes and dangled our legs in the water and talked about all kinds of things. We was always naked, day and night, whenever the mosquitoes would let us. The new clothes Buck's folks made for me was too good to be comfortable, and besides, I didn't go much on clothes nohow. Sometimes we'd have that whole river all to ourselves for the longest time. Yonder was the banks and the islands across the water, and maybe a spark, which was a candle in a cabin window. And sometimes on the water you could see a spark or two, on a raft or a scow, you know, and maybe you could hear a fiddle or a song coming over from one of them crafts. It's lovely to live on a raft. We had the sky up there, all speckled with stars, and we used to lay on our backs and look up at them, and discuss about whether they were made or only just happened. Jim, he allowed they was made, but I allowed they happened. I judged it would have took too long to make so many. Jim said the moon could have laid them. Well, that looked kind of reasonable, so I didn't say nothing against it, because I've seen a frog lay most as many, so of course it could be done. We used to watch the stars that fell, too, and see them streak down. Jim allowed they'd got spoiled and was hove out of the nest. Once or twice of a night we would see a steamboat slipping along in the dark, and now and then she would belch a whole world of sparks up out of her chimblies, and they would rain down in the river and look awful pretty. Then she would turn a corner and her lights would wink out, and her powwow shut off and leave the river still again. And by her waves would get to us a long time after she was gone, and joggle the raft a bit. And after that you wouldn't hear nothing, for you couldn't tell how long, except maybe frogs or something. After midnight the people on shore went to bed, and then for 2 or 3 hours the shores was black. No more sparks in the cabin windows. These sparks was our clock. The first one that showed again meant morning was coming, so we hunted a place to hide and tie up right away. One morning about daybreak I found a canoe and crossed over a chute to the main shore. It was only 200 yards, and paddled about a mile up a creek amongst the cypress woods to see if I couldn't get some berries. Just as I was passing a place where a kind of a cow path crossed the crick, here comes a couple of men tearing up the path as tight as they could foot it. I thought I was a goner, for whenever anybody was after anybody, I judged it was me, or maybe Jim. I was about to dig out from there in a hurry, but they was pretty close to me then, and sung out and begged me to save their lives. Said they hadn't been doing nothing, and was being chased for it. Said there was men and dogs a-comin'. They wanted to jump right in, but I says, "Don't you do it. I don't hear the dogs and horses yet. You've got time to crowd through the brush and get up the crick a little ways. Then you take to the water and wade down to me and get in. That'll throw the dogs off the scent." They done it, and soon as they was aboard I lit out for our towhead. In about 5 or 10 minutes we heard the dogs and the men away off shouting. We heard them come along towards the crick, but couldn't see them. They seemed to stop and fool around a while. Then, as we got further and further away all the time, we couldn't hardly hear them at all. By the time we had left a mile of woods behind us and struck the river, everything was quiet. We paddled over to the towhead and hid in the cottonwoods and was safe. One of these fellows was about 70 or upwards, and had a bald head and very gray whiskers. He had an old battered-up slouch hat on, and a greasy blue woolen shirt, and ragged old blue jean breeches stuffed into his boot tops, and home-knit galluses. No, he only had one. He had an old long-tailed blue jeans coat with slick brass buttons flung over his arm, and both of them had big, fat, ratty-looking carpet bags. The other fellow was about 30, and dressed about as ornery. After breakfast we all laid off and talked, and the first thing that come out was that these chaps didn't know one another.
"What got you into trouble?"
Says the bald head to the other chap. Well, I'd been selling an article to take the tartar off the teeth, and it does take it off too, and generally the enamel along with it, but I stayed about one night longer than I ought to, and was just in the act of sliding out when I ran across you on the trail this side of town, and you told me they were coming, and begged me to help you get off. So I told you I was expecting trouble myself, and would scatter out with you. That's the whole yarn. What's yourn? Well, I've been running a little tempered survival there about a week, and was the pet of the women folks, big and little, for I was making it mighty warm for the rummies, I tell you, and taking as much as $5 or $6 a night, 10 cents a head, children and niggers free, and business a-growing all the time, when somehow or another a little report got around last night that I had a way of putting in my time with a private jug on the sly. A nigger rousted me out this morning, and told me the people was gathering on the quiet with their dogs and horses, and they'd be along pretty soon and give me about half an hour's start, and then run me down if they could. And if they got me, they'd tar and feather me and ride me on a rail, sure. I didn't wait for no breakfast. I warn't hungry. Old man, said the young one, I reckon we might double-team it together. What do you think? I ain't undisposed. What's your line mainly? Juripritter by trade. Do a little in patent medicines. Theater actor. Tragedy, you know. Take a turn to mesmerism and phrenology when there's chance. Teach singing geography school for a change. Sling a lecture sometimes. Oh, I do lots of things. Most anything that comes handy so it ain't work. What's your lay? I've done considerable in the doctorin' way in my time. Layin' on of hands is my best holt, for cancer and paralysis and such things, and I can tell a fortune pretty good when I've got somebody along to find out the facts for me. Preachin's my line, too, and working camp meetin's, and missionarying around. Nobody never said anything for a while. Then the young man hove a sigh and says, Alas! What are you alassin' about? Says the bald head. To think I should have lived to be leading such a life, and be degraded down into such company. And he begun to wipe the corner of his eye with a rag. Dern your skin, ain't the company good enough for you? Says the bald head, pretty pert and uppish. Yes, it is good enough for me. It's as good as I deserve, for who fetched me so low when I was so high? I did myself. I don't blame you, gentlemen. Far from it. I don't blame anybody. I deserve it all. Let the cold world do its worst. One thing I know, there's a grave somewhere for me. The world may go on just as it's always done, and take everything from me. Loved ones, property, everything. But it can't take that. Some day I'll lie down in it and forget it all, and my poor broken heart will be at rest. He went on a-wiping. Drot your poor broken heart, says the bald head. What are you heaving your poor broken heart at us for? We hain't done nothing. No, I know you haven't. I ain't blaming you, gentlemen. I brought myself down. Yes, I did it myself. It's right I should suffer. Perfectly right. I don't make any moan. Brought you down from where? Where was you brought down from? Ah, you would not believe me. The world never believes. Let it pass. 'Tis no matter. The secret of my birth... The secret of your birth? Do you mean to say... Gentlemen, says the young man, very solemn.
I will reveal it to you, for I feel I may have confidence in you. By rights, I am a duke.
Jim's eyes bugged out when he heard that, and I reckon mine did too. Then the bald head says, "No, you can't mean it."
Yes, my great-grandfather, eldest son of the Duke of Bridgewater, fled to this country about the end of the last century, to breathe the pure air of freedom, married here, and died, leaving a son, his own father dying about the same time. The second son of the late Duke seized the titles and estates. The infant real Duke was ignored. I am the lineal descendant of that infant. I am the rightful Duke of Bridgewater, and here I am, forlorn, torn from my high estate, hunted of men, despised by the cold world, ragged, worn, heartbroken, and degraded to the companionship of felons on a raft.
Jim pitied him ever so much, and so did I. We tried to comfort him, but he said it warn't much use. He couldn't be much comforted. Said if we was a mind to acknowledge him, that would do him more good than most anything else. So he said we would, if he would tell us how. He said we ought to bow when we spoke to him and say, "Your Grace," or "My Lord," or "Your Lordship," and he wouldn't mind it if we called him plain Bridgewater, which he said was a title anyway and not a name, and one of us ought to wait on him at dinner and do any little thing for him he wanted done. Well, that was all easy, so we done it. All through dinner Jim stood around and waited on him and says, "Will your Grace have some of dis or some of dat?" and so on, and a body could see it was mighty pleasing to him. But the old man got pretty silent by and by, didn't have much to say, and didn't look pretty comfortable over all that patting that was going on around that Duke. He seemed to have something on his mind. So along in the afternoon he says, "Looky here, Bridgewater," he says, "I'm nation sorry for you, but you ain't the only person that's had troubles like that." "No?" "No, you ain't. You ain't the only person that's been snaked down wrongfully out of a high place." "Alas!" "No, you ain't the only person that's had a secret of his birth." And by jings, he begins to cry. "Hold! What do you mean?" "Bilgewater, can I trust you?" says the old man, still sort of sobbing. "To the bitter death." He took the old man by the hand and squeezed it, and says, "That secret of your being, speak." "Bilgewater, I am the late Dolphin." You bet you, Jim and me stared this time. Then the Duke says, "You are what?" "Yes, my friend, it is too true. Your eyes is looking at this very moment at the poor, disappeared Dauphin, Louis the 17, son of Louis the 16 and Mary Antoinette." "You? At your age? No. You mean you're the late Charlemagne? You must be 600 or 700 years old at the very least." "Trouble has done it, Bilgewater. Trouble has done it. Trouble has brung these gray hairs and this premature balditude. Yes, gentlemen, you see before you, in blue jeans and misery, the wandering, exiled, trampled on and suffering rightful King of France." Well, he cried and took on so that me and Jim didn't know hardly what to do. We was so sorry, and so glad and proud we got him with us too. So we set in, like we'd done before with the Duke, and tried to comfort him. But he said it warn't no use. Nothing but to be dead and done with it all could do him any good, though he said it often made him feel easier and better for a while if people treated him according to his rights, and got down on one knee to speak to him, and always called him Your Majesty, and waited on him first at meals, and didn't set down in his presence till he asked them. So Jim and me set to majestying him, and doing this and that and the other for him, and standing up till he told us we might set down. This done him heaps o' good, and so he got cheerful and comfortable. But the Duke kinder soured on him, and didn't look a bit satisfied with the way things was goin'. Still, the King acted real friendly towards him, and said the Duke's great grandfather and all the other Dukes of Bilgewater was a good deal thought of by his father, and was allowed to come to the palace considerable. But the Duke stayed huffy a good while, till by and by the King says, "Like as not we got to be together a blame long time on this here raft, Bilgewater, and so what's the use o' your being sour? It'll only make things uncomfortable. It ain't my fault I warn't born a duke. It ain't your fault you warn't born a king. So what's the use to worry? Make the best o' things the way you find 'em, says I. That's my motto. This ain't no bad thing we've struck here. Plenty grub and an easy life. Come, give us your hand, Duke, and let's all be friends." The Duke done it, and Jim and me was pretty glad to see it. It took away all the uncomfortableness, and we felt mighty good over it, because it would have been a miserable business to have any unfriendliness on the raft. For what you want above all things on a raft is for everybody to be satisfied and feel right and kind towards the others. It didn't take me long to make up my mind that these liars weren't no kings nor dukes at all, but just low-down humbugs and frauds. But I never said nothin', never let on, kept it to myself. It's the best way. Then you don't have no quarrels, and don't get into no trouble. If they wanted us to call them kings and dukes, I hadn't no objections, long as it would keep peace in the family, and it weren't no use to tell Jim, so I didn't tell him. If I never learned anything else out of Pap, I learnt that the best way to get along with his kind of people is to let them have their own way. End of chapter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Chapter 20. They asked us considerable many questions, wanted to know what we covered up the raft that way for, and laid by in the daytime instead of running. Was Jim a runaway nigger? Says I. Goodness sakes, would a runaway nigger run south? No, they allowed he wouldn't. I had to account for things some way, so I says, my folks was living in Pike County in Missouri, where I was born, and they all died off but me and Pa and my brother Ike. Pa, he 'lowed he'd break up and go down and live with Uncle Ben, who's got a little one-horse place on the river, 44 mile below Orleans. Pa was pretty poor and had some debts, so when he'd squared up there warn't nothin' left but $16 and our nigger Jim. That warn't enough to take us 1,400 mile deck passage nor no other way. Well, when the river rose, Pa had a streak o' luck one day. He ketched this piece of a raft, so we reckoned we'd go down to Orleans on it. Pa's luck didn't hold out. A steamboat run over the forward quarter of the raft one night, and we all went overboard and dove under the wheel. Jim and me come up all right, but Pa was drunk, and Ike was only 4 years old, so they never come up no more. Well, for the next day or two we had considerable trouble, because people was always coming out in skiffs and trying to take Jim away from me, saying they believed he was a runaway nigger. We don't run daytimes no more now. Nights, they don't bother us. The Duke says, leave me alone to cipher out a way so we can run in the daytime if we want to. I'll think the thing over. I'll invent a plan that'll fix it. We'll let it alone for today, because of course we don't want to go by that town yonder in daylight. It mightn't be healthy. Towards night it begun to darken up and look like rain. The heat lightning was squirting around low down in the sky, and the leaves was beginning to shiver. It was going to be pretty ugly. It was easy to see that. So the Duke and the King went to overhauling our wigwam to see what the beds was like. My bed was a straw tick better than Jim's, which was a corn shuck tick, and there always cobs around about in a shuck tick, and they poke into you and hurt. And when you roll over, the dry shucks sound like you was rolling over in a pile of dead leaves. It makes such a rustling that you wake up. Well, the Duke allowed he would take my bed, but the King allowed he wouldn't. He says, "I should have reckoned the difference in rank would have suggested to you that a corn shuck bed warn't just fitting for me to sleep on. Your Grace'll take the shuck bed yourself." Jim and me was in a sweat again for a minute, being afraid there was going to be some more trouble amongst them. So we was pretty glad when the Duke says, "'Tis my fate to be always ground into the mire under the iron heel of oppression. Misfortune has broken my once haughty spirit. I yield, I submit. 'Tis my fate. I am alone in the world. Let me suffer. Can bear it." We got away as soon as it was good and dark. The King told us to stand well out towards the middle of the river, and not show a light till we got a long ways below the town. We come in sight of the little bunch of lights by and by. That was the town, you know, and slid by about a half a mile out all right. When we was 3/4 of a mile below, we hoisted up our signal lantern, and about 10 o'clock it came on to rain and blow and thunder and lightning like everything. So the King told us to both stay on watch till the weather got better. Then him and the Duke crawled into the wigwam and turned in for the night. It was my watch below till 12, but I wouldn't have turned in anyway if I'd had a bed, because a body don't see such a storm as that every day in the week, not by a long sight. My souls, how the wind did scream along! Every second or two there come a glare that lit up the white caps for a half a mile around, and you'd see the islands looking dusty through the rain, and the trees thrashing around in the wind. Then comes a whack! Bum, bum, bumble-umble-um, bum, 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 and the thunder would go rumbling and grumbling away and quit, and then rip comes another flash and another sacco de lodger. The waves most washed me off the raft sometimes, but I hadn't any clothes on and didn't mind. We didn't have no trouble about snags. The lightning was glaring and flittering around so constant that we could see them plenty soon enough to throw her head this way or that and miss them. I had the middle watch, you know, but I was pretty sleepy by that time, so Jim he said he could stand the first half of it for me. He was always mighty good that way, Jim was. I crawled into the wigwam, but the King and the Duke had their legs sprawled around so there warn't no show for me, so I laid outside. I didn't mind the rain because it was warm, and the waves warn't running so high now. About 2 they come up again, though, and Jim was going to call me, but he changed his mind because he reckoned they weren't high enough yet to do any harm. But he was mistaken about that, for pretty soon all of a sudden along comes a regular ripper and washed me overboard. It most killed Jim a-laughing. He was the easiest nigger to laugh that ever was, anyway. I took the watch, and Jim he laid down and snored away, and by the storm let up for good and all, and the first cabin light that showed I rousted him out, and we slid the raft into hiding quarters for the day. The King got out an old ratty deck of cards after breakfast, and him and the Duke played 7-up a while, 5 cents a game. Then they got tired of it and allowed they would lay out a campaign, as they called it. The Duke went down into his carpet-bag and fetched up a lot of little printed bills and read them aloud. One bill said, "The celebrated Dr. Armand de Montauban of Paris would lecture on the science of phrenology at such and such a place on the blank day of blank at 10 cents admission, and furnish charts of character at 25 cents apiece." The Duke said that was him. In another bill he was the world-renowned Shakespearean tragedian, Garrick the Younger, of Drury Lane, London." In other bills he had a lot of other names and done other wonderful things, like finding water and gold with a divining rod, dissipating witch spells, and so on. By and by he says, "But the histrionic muse is the darlin'. Have you ever trod the boards, royalty?" "No," says the king. "You shall then, before you're 3 days older, fallen grandeur," says the duke. "The first good town we come to we'll hire a hall and do the sword fight in Richard III, and the balcony scene in Romeo and Juliet. How does that strike you?" "I'm in up to the hub for anything that will pay, Bilgewater, but you see I don't know nothin' about play actin', and hain't ever seen much of it. I was too small when Pap used to have 'em at the palace. Do you reckon you can learn me?" "Easy." "All right. I'm just a freezin' for something fresh, anyway. Let's commence right away." So the duke he told him all about who Romeo was and who Juliet was, and said he was used to being Romeo, so the king could be Juliet. "But if Juliet's such a young gal, Duke, my peeled head and my white whiskers is going to look uncommon odd on her, maybe." "No, don't you worry. These country jakes won't ever think of that. Besides, you know, you'll be in costume, and that makes all the difference in the world. Juliet's in a balcony, enjoying the moonlight before she goes to bed, and she's got on her nightgown and a ruffled nightcap. Here are the costumes for the parts." He got out 2 or 3 curtain calico suits, which he said was medieval armor for Richard III and the other chap, and a long white cotton nightshirt and a ruffled nightcap to match. The king was satisfied, so the duke got out his book and read the parts over in the most splendid spread-eagle way, prancing around and acting at the same time to show how it had got to be done. Then he give the book to the king and told him to get his part by heart. There was a little one-horse town about 3 mile down the bend, and after dinner the duke said he had ciphered out his idea about how to run in daylight without it being dangersome for Jim. So he allowed he would go down to the town and fix that thing. The king allowed he would go too and see if he couldn't strike something. We was out of coffee, so Jim said I better go along with them in the canoe and get some. When we got there, there wa'n't nobody stirring, streets empty, and perfectly dead and still, like Sunday. We found a sick nigger sunning himself in the backyard, and he said everybody that wa'n't too young or too sick or too old was gone to camp meeting about 2 mile back in the woods. The king got the directions and allowed he'd go and work that camp meeting for all it was worth, and I might go too. The duke said that what he was after was a printing office. We found it, a little bit of a concern, up over a carpenter shop. Carpenters and printers all gone to the meeting, and no doors locked. It was a dirty, littered-up place and had ink marks and handbills with pictures of horses and runaway niggers on them, all over the walls. The duke shed his coat and said he was all right now. So me and the king lit out for the camp meeting. We got there in about a half an hour fairly dripping, for it was a most awful hot day. There was as much as 1,000 people there from 20 mile around. The woods was full of teams and wagons, hitched everywheres, feeding out of the wagon troughs and stomping to keep off the flies. There was sheds made out of poles and roofed over with branches, where they had lemonade and gingerbread to sell, and piles of watermelons and green corn and such like truck. The preaching was going on under the same kind of sheds, only they was bigger and held crowds of people. The benches was made out of outside slabs of logs with holes bored in the round side to drive sticks into for legs. They didn't have no backs. The preachers had high platforms to stand on at one end of the sheds. The women had on sunbonnets, and some had linsey-woolsey frocks, some gingham ones, and a few of the young ones had on calico. Some of the young men were barefooted, and some of the children didn't have any clothes on but just a tow linen shirt. Some of the old women was knitting, and some of the young folks was courting on the sly. The first shed we come to, the preacher was lining out a hymn. He lined out 2 lines, everybody sung it, and it was kind of grand to hear it. There was so many of them, and they done it in such a rousing way. Then he lined out 2 more for them to sing, and so on. The people woke up more and more and sung louder and louder, and towards the end some begun to groan and some begun to shout. Then the preacher begun to preach, and begun in earnest too, and went weaving first to one side of the platform and then the other, and then a-leaning down over the front of it, with his arms and his body going all the time, and shouting his words out with all his might. And every now and then he would hold up his Bible and spread it open, and kind of pass it around this way and that, shouting, "It's the brazen serpent in the wilderness. Look upon it and live." And people would shout out, "Glory! Amen!" And so he went on, and the people groaning and crying and saying amen. "Oh, come to the mourner's bench, come black with sin, amen. Come sick and sore, amen. Come lame and halt and blind, amen. Come poor and needy, sunk in shame, amen. Come all that's worn and soiled and suffering, come with a broken spirit, come with a contrite heart, come in your rags and sin and dirt. The waters that cleanse is free, the door of heaven stands open. Oh, enter in and be at rest. Amen. Glory, glory, hallelujah." And so on. You couldn't make out what the preacher said any more, on account of the shouting and crying. Folks got up everywheres in the crowd and worked their way just by main strength to the mourners' bench, with the tears running down their faces. And when all the mourners had got up there to the front benches in a crowd, they sung and shouted and flung themselves down on the straw just crazy and wild. Well, the first I knowed the king got a-going, and you could hear him over everybody. And next he went a-charging up onto the platform, and the preacher he begged him to speak to the people, and he done it. He told them he was a pirate. Been a pirate for 30 years out in the Indian Ocean, and his crew was thinned out considerable last spring in a fight, and he was home now to take out some fresh men. And thanks to goodness he'd been robbed last night and put ashore off of a steamboat without a cent, and he was glad of it. It was the blessedest thing that ever happened to him, because he was a changed man now, and happy for the first time in his life, and poor as he was going to start right off and work his way back to the Indian Ocean, and put in the rest of his life trying to turn the pirates into the true path, for he could do it better than anybody else, being acquainted with all pirate crews in that ocean. And though it would take him a long time to get there without money, he would get there anyway. And every time he convinced a pirate, he would say to him, "Don't you thank me, don't you give me no credit. It all belongs to them dear people in Pokeville camp meeting, natural brothers and benefactors of the race, and that dear preacher there, the truest friend a pirate ever had." Then he bursted into tears, and so did everybody. Then somebody sings out, "Take up a collection for 'em, take up a collection." Well, a half a dozen made a jump to do it, but somebody sings out, "Let him pass the hat around." Then everybody said it, the preacher too. So the king went all through the crowd with his hat, swabbing his eyes, and blessing the people and praising them, and thanking them for being so good to the poor pirates away off there. And every little while the prettiest kind of girls, with the tears running down their cheeks, would up and ask him would he let them kiss him for to remember him by, and he always done it, and some of them he hugged and kissed as many as 5 or 6 times. And he was invited to stay a week, and everybody wanted him to live in their houses, and said they'd think it was an honor. But he said, as this was the last day of the camp meeting, he couldn't do no good, and besides, he was in a sweat to get to the Indian Ocean right off and go to work on the pirates. When we got back to the raft and he come to count up, he found he had collected $87.75. And then he had fetched away a 3-gallon jug of whiskey, too, that he found under a wagon when he was starting home through the woods. The king said, take it all around, it laid over any day he'd ever put in the missionarying line. He said it warn't no use talking. Heathens don't amount to shucks alongside of pirates to work a camp meeting with. The Duke was thinking he'd been doing pretty well till the king come to show up, but after that he didn't think so much. He had set up and printed off 2 little jobs for farmers in that printing office, horse bills, and took the money, $4, and he had got in $10 worth of advertisements for the paper, which he said he would put in for $4 if they would pay in advance. So they done it. The price of the paper was $2 a year, but he took in 3 subscriptions for half $1 apiece on condition of them paying him in advance. They was going to pay in cordwood and onions as usual, but he said he had just bought the concern and knocked down the price as low as he could afford it, and was going to run it for cash. He set up a little piece of poetry which he made hisself out of his own head, 3 verses, kind of sweet and saddish. The name of it was Yes, Crush, Cold World, This Breaking Heart, and he left that all set up and ready to print in the paper, and didn't charge nothing for it. Well, he took in $9.50, and said he'd done a pretty square day's work for it. Then he showed us another little job he printed and hadn't charged for, because it was for us. It had a picture of a runaway nigger with a bundle on a stick over his shoulder, and $200 reward under it. The reading was all about Jim, and just described him to a dot. It said he run away from St. Jack's plantation, 40 miles below New Orleans, last winter, and likely went north, and whoever would catch him and send him back, he could have the reward and expenses. Now, says the Duke, after tonight we can run in the daytime if we want to. Whenever we see anybody coming, we can tie Jim hand and foot with a rope and lay him in the wigwam and show this handbill and say we captured him up the river and were too poor to travel on a steamboat, so we got this little raft on credit from our friends and are going down to get the reward. Handcuffs and chains would look still better on Jim, but it wouldn't go well with the story of us being so poor. Too much like jewelry. Ropes are the correct thing. We must preserve the unities, as we say on the boards. We all said the Duke was pretty smart, and there couldn't be no trouble about running daytimes. We judged we could make miles enough the night to get out of the reach of the powwow we reckoned the Duke's work in the printing office was going to make in that little town. Then we could boom right along if we wanted to. We laid low and kept still, and never shoved out till nearly 10 o'clock. Then we slid by, pretty wide away from the town, and didn't hoist our lantern till we was clear out of sight of it. When Jim called me to take the watch at 4 in the morning, he says, "Huck, does you reckon we're going to run across any more kings on this trip?" "No," I says, "I reckon not."
"Well," says he, "that's all right den. I don't mind 1 or 2 kings, but that's enough. This one's powerful drunk, and the Duke ain't much better."
I found Jim had been trying to get him to talk French, so he could hear what it was like, but he said he had been in this country so long and had so much trouble, he'd forgot it. End of chapter.